You said yes again. You knew the answer was no. You felt it clearly before the question was even finished. Something inside you recognized it immediately. A tightness, a quiet pulling back, the part of you that always knows before the thinking starts. This is too much. I do not have the space for this. I do not want to do this. And then the other person looked at you, and the familiar pressure arrived, the anticipation of their disappointment, the image of their face shifting if you said what was actually true, the specific discomfort of being the reason someone feels let down. And you heard yourself say yes. Maybe it came out immediately. Maybe you hesitated for a moment and then said it anyway. Maybe you added qualifications and softers, and maybe I can make it work. But the result was the same. Yes, when everything inside you was saying no. And you drove home or walked away or got off the call thinking the same thought you have thought so many times before. Why did I do that again? Not frustration with them. Frustration with yourself. Because you knew. You always know. The honest answer is almost always there, clear and immediate, before the second-guessing arrives. And then the second-guessing arrives. And by the time it finishes, you are committed to something you did not want, in a situation you did not choose, and you cannot quite trace the path from knowing no to saying yes. It happened again, the way it always happens. The way it has been happening for years. Here is what you need to understand about that moment. It was not weakness. It was not a lack of discipline or character or backbone. It was not simply being too nice, though that is the story most people tell themselves because it is easier to carry than the truth. It was a psychological pattern, one that runs deep, one that runs fast, one that runs so automatically that by the time the conscious, thinking part of you arrives, the decision has already been made. And patterns that run that deep have a history, a real history, built from real experiences that made real sense at a specific point in time. Understanding that history is not about excusing the pattern. It is about finally being able to see it clearly enough to change it. That is what this is for. Here's the first thing you need to understand, and this reframes everything. The inability to say no is not about the present situation. It is almost never about the specific request that just arrived. Almost never about this particular person. Almost never about this exact moment. It is about what saying no has meant in the past. Specifically, it is about what the nervous system learned to expect when you said no. Here is how that learning happens. Early in life, in the relationships that mattered most, in the environments where you were most dependent, saying no carried a cost. Not a hypothetical cost, not an imagined one, a real, experienced, repeated cost. Saying no meant someone got angry, the kind of anger that felt unsafe, the kind that filled a room and changed everything in it. Saying no meant someone withdrew, became cold, went distant in a way that felt like punishment, like love was being withheld until the compliance returned. Saying no meant being labeled selfish, difficult, ungrateful, too much, not enough. Saying no meant the relationship became unstable in a way that was frightening. Because when you are young and dependent, relationship instability is not just uncomfortable, it is genuinely threatening. And the nervous system, which is extraordinarily good at learning from experience, drew a conclusion, not in language, not consciously, in the body, in the automatic response that forms before thought arrives. The conclusion was this: no is dangerous, no costs, something I cannot afford to pay, no puts the things I need most at risk. And from that conclusion, the pattern was constructed, a survival pattern, designed to keep the connection intact, to keep the approval flowing, to keep the love available. Every time the pressure to agree arrived, the nervous system ran its calculation. The cost of saying no outweighs the cost of saying yes. Say yes, and you did, because you were smart, because you were adaptive, because you understood, even without being able to name it, what was required to keep the peace in the environment you were in. But here is what you are missing about that pattern. It served you, not hypothetically, actually. In a specific environment with specific people, at a specific stage of your life when your options were genuinely limited, the yes pattern worked. It protected the connection you needed. It kept the peace that made the environment livable. It earned the approval that felt, at the time, like it was necessary for survival. The yes pattern was not a mistake. It was a solution built by a version of you that was working with the tools available in an environment that required it, doing the best that could be done with what was there. And here is what makes it hard to let go of now. The solution traveled with you into environments that do not require it, into relationships that could handle your honesty, into a version of your adult life where the cost of saying no is nowhere near what the nervous system is predicting. But the nervous system does not know that. The nervous system keeps running the old calculation. Old cost of no. Loss of love, loss of safety, loss of belonging, loss of the connection that felt necessary to survive. Current actual cost of no, temporary awkwardness, minor disappointment, a moment of friction that will likely pass quickly, completely different magnitudes, but the system is treating them identically because the system learned in one context and has been applying that learning to every context since. Regardless of whether the contexts are similar, regardless of whether the people involved are anything like the people who made no dangerous in the first place. The old program runs on new situations, and until the program updates, the pattern continues. Here is where it gets uncomfortable, because this is the piece that goes deeper than the fear. The people-pleasing is not only about avoiding the cost of no, it is also about identity. Over time, for most people who struggle with this, the yes pattern does not just become habitual. It becomes who they are, or at least who they believe they are. The person who is always there. The person who can always be counted on. The person who never lets people down. The person whose reliability is never in question. The person whose presence in people's lives is justified by their usefulness. That identity is not nothing. It feels meaningful. It feels like a contribution. It earns a kind of love and appreciation that feels good to receive. The problem is what happens when the identity hardens into a trap, when being helpful stops being something you choose and becomes something you cannot stop, when being reliable stops being a value and becomes a compulsion, when the only version of yourself that feels safe, or lovable, or acceptable is the version that agrees to everything. At that point, the yes is no longer generosity. It is protection. It is the only tool you have for making sure that your position in the relationship stays secure, that the people around you continue to value you, that you continue to belong. Because underneath the hopefulness, underneath the reliability, underneath the constant availability, there is a question that has never fully been answered. If I stopped being useful, would anyone stay? If I stopped making myself easy to have around, would I still be wanted? If I said no and kept saying no, would the people I loved drift away? That question is the engine of the pattern, and it keeps running because it has never been tested honestly, because the yes has always arrived before the test could happen. Now, here is the thing about the moment of the yes that most people have never examined closely. The yes does not come from nowhere. There is a sequence, and understanding the sequence is what makes it possible to interrupt. The request arrives, and in the very first instant, before any deliberation, the honest response forms. It is almost always immediate, almost always clear. The gut response, the body response. The body that knew before the thinking started, this is too much. I do not want this. The answer is no. And then, in the gap between that honest first response and the spoken response, something happens. Something that is fast, something that is automatic, something that has been running so long it has become invisible. The nervous system performs its rapid threat assessment. What will happen if I say no? How will they react? Will they be disappointed? Will they be angry? Will something between us shift in a way I cannot control? Will they think less of me? Will this damage something I cannot afford to lose? Can I bear the discomfort of their reaction? Is there a way to say no that makes none of that happen? The assessment runs in milliseconds, and the conclusion, based on years of learned experience, arrives just as quickly. The risk is too high. The cost is too uncertain. Say yes, and by the time the conscious mind has fully registered what is happening, the yes is already forming. Here is what this means for change. You cannot stop the assessment. It is too deeply wired, too fast, too automatic. But you can change what the assessment concludes, and that change does not happen in the moment of the request. It happens in the work done before the moment arrives. In the honest reckoning, separate from any specific situation, with what saying no actually costs in this specific relationship, with this specific person, at this specific point in your life. When you do that reckoning honestly, almost always the conclusion is the same. The real cost is much less than the nervous system predicts. The disapproval will be temporary. The disappointment will pass. The relationship, if it is a real one, will hold. And every time that is true, and you know it is true, the nervous system receives new information. New information changes old predictions. Old predictions changing is what changes the pattern. Here is something about the people around you that most people who struggle with this have never fully sat with. Most of the people who receive your yes have no idea what it costs you. They do not know that the yes was not honest. They do not know about the internal negotiation that preceded it. They do not know that you will spend the next 3 days quietly resenting a commitment made from fear rather than genuine willingness. They do not know that the smile accompanying the yes was produced by the same person who was screaming no internally 30 seconds before. They just know you said yes, and they built on it, scheduled around it, planned around it, incorporated it into their expectations of you. And here is the part that is genuinely hard to sit with. You created those expectations, not maliciously, not thoughtlessly, by being consistently, reliably, sustainably looking available in a way that was never actually sustainable. By presenting a version of yourself whose capacity for yes was larger than it really was. By never giving people accurate information about what you could genuinely offer. Every yes built the expectation that another yes would follow, and another, until the yes was not just something you said, it was something people counted on, something they factored into their plans, something that shaped how they related to you. And now, changing that, now beginning to give honest answers, feels like breaking a promise you never consciously made. It feels like pulling the rug out from under people, like suddenly becoming someone different from the person they knew, like a kind of betrayal. And that feeling, that guilt of changing the terms, keeps many people in the pattern long after they have understood everything in this script. Here is what you need to hear about that feeling. The promise you think you are breaking was never a real promise. It was an impression you gave that was not accurate, and giving accurate information now, even though it is harder than continuing the impression, is not a betrayal. It is finally being honest about what is real. And honesty, even when it is uncomfortable to receive, is a more genuine form of care than the managed performance of unlimited availability. Here's the midpoint truth that changes the whole approach to this. Saying no is not selfish, it is honest. And honesty is the most genuinely generous thing you can offer another person. Here is why. The yes that you did not mean is not a gift. It looks like a gift. In the short term, it functions as one. It produces the gratitude and the appreciation and the sense of being valued that the pattern was designed to produce. But it is not given freely. It is a transaction in which you give something you did not want to give in exchange for the safety of not having to deal with the consequences of saying no. And the person on the receiving end of that transaction does not get what they actually needed from you. They do not get your genuine presence. They get the performance of it. They do not get your real enthusiasm. They get the management of a situation that required you to pretend. They do not get your honest yes. They get your fearful compliance. And most people, if they are paying attention, can feel the difference. They cannot always name it. They may never say anything about it. But something in them registers the quality of a yes that came freely versus a yes that came reluctantly. The freely given yes says, I actually want to do this. The reluctant yes says, I felt I had to. And a relationship built primarily on reluctant yeses is not quite as real as it appears. The honest no builds something better. When you say no honestly, you are saying, I respect you enough to tell you the truth. When you say no, and then later say yes, you are saying that yes means something because I am capable of the alternative. When you no longer give unlimited access by default, you are saying, what I do offer is genuine. That is not selfishness. That is the foundation on which real relationships are built. Let us talk about the physical experience of saying no. Because for people who struggle with this, the body is involved in a way that thinking about it cannot reach. When the moment comes to say no, the body does not stay neutral. The chest tightens. Something in the stomach shifts. The throat may close slightly. The breathing changes. The heart rate picks up. These are the physical signals of the threat response. The same signals the body generates in the presence of genuine danger. And they are not imagined. They are not exaggerated. They are real, measurable, physical experiences of a nervous system that learned in a specific environment at a specific time that this kind of moment carries risk. And because the signals are real, the threat feels real, even when the current situation contains nothing close to what the body is responding to. The person asking you for a favor is not dangerous. The colleague making a request is not a threat to your survival. The friend who wants something from you is not someone whose disappointment will cost you everything you need, but the body is responding as if they might be, because the body learned in one place and is applying that learning here. This is important to understand. The physical discomfort of saying no is not evidence that you should not say it. It is evidence of an old learning that has not yet been updated. The discomfort is the old program running, not the current reality speaking. And the way the program updates is through new experience. Every time you say the honest no and the anticipated catastrophe does not arrive, the nervous system receives new information that says the no was survivable, that the relationship held, that the disapproval was temporary and manageable, that the feared outcome was not what actually happened. Each experience of the no surviving is a small update to the old prediction, not dramatic, not transformative on its own, but cumulative. With enough updates, the physical response to saying no begins to change. Not to nothing, it does not disappear entirely, but to something smaller, something proportionate, something more like the mild discomfort of a hard moment rather than the full activation of a threat response. And in that smaller discomfort, the no becomes possible in a way it was not before. Not easy. Possible, which is all it needs to be. Now let us talk about the specific course that most people never connect to the pattern. The course that builds so slowly it is almost invisible until it is enormous. Resentment. Every yes that was not honest generates a small deposit of resentment, not always conscious, sometimes so quiet you barely notice it arriving, sometimes so normalized you have stopped registering it. But it is there, sitting underneath the yes, underneath the helpfulness, underneath the performance of being fine with it. And resentment, accumulated over years of unspoken no's, does something specific to a relationship. It creates a layer between you and the other person made of everything you wanted to say and did not. Every time you felt taken for granted and said nothing, every time you gave more than you had and performed gratitude for the opportunity. Every time you absorbed a request that should have been refused and then processed the resentment alone. The layer gets thicker over time, and at some point it is thick enough that the genuine warmth, the real affection, the actual connection that was supposed to be the point of the relationship starts to feel distant. You are present, but not really there. You are giving, but not really connected to the giving. You are showing up, but the showing up has become mechanical. Going through motions that used to feel meaningful and now feel like maintenance, and the person you were doing all of this for can feel that shift, even if neither of you has named it, even if the surface of the relationship looks exactly the same. Something is different. Something that was warm has gone a little cold. Something that felt real has become managed. That is resentment doing what resentment does, quietly corroding the thing it lives underneath. Here is another cost that runs even deeper. Self-abandonment. Every time you override your honest response to produce the socially acceptable one, you are making a choice. The choice says, their comfort in this moment is more important than my truth. And you make this choice not once, not occasionally, hundreds of times, across hundreds of interactions, across years, and the cumulative message that you send to yourself through all of those choices accumulates into something, a belief. The belief says, my experience is less important. My limits are negotiable. What I actually want is less legitimate than what others need from me. My discomfort does not have the same weight as their comfort. I am here primarily to make things easier for the people around me. That belief, absorbed over time, changes how you relate to your own inner life. The wants become quieter because they keep getting overridden. The needs become harder to name because naming them and not having them met is more painful than simply going without. The preferences become uncertain because they have been set aside so consistently that you have stopped being sure they are real. The person who has been self-abandoning for long enough often reaches a point where someone asks them what they want and they genuinely do not know. Not because they have no preferences, because they have spent so long oriented around other people's needs that their own interior has gone quiet, not empty. Quiet. Turned down so low that accessing it requires a deliberate effort that does not feel natural. This is not a small side effect. It is the loss of something fundamental, the connection to yourself, to your own genuine experience of being alive, to the part of you that knows what it wants, what it needs, what it feels, what it values, what is true for you, and rebuilding that connection. Restoring the relationship with your own interior life is what learning to say no is actually about. Not just the no. The self who is allowed to exist on the other side of it. Here is what the guilt is actually doing. Because this is the feeling that stops most people in the middle of the no. The no starts to form, or the no is said, and immediately, sometimes before it is even finished, the guilt arrives. The feeling that you have done something wrong, that you have caused harm, that you are being selfish, that a better person, a kinder person, someone with more capacity than you, would have found a way to say yes. And the guilt is so uncomfortable that many people immediately begin to undo the no. Adding qualifications. Offering alternatives. Apologizing so extensively that the apology itself becomes a yes. Explaining themselves so thoroughly that the explanation is really an invitation to keep pushing, because the guilt feels like a signal, like the conscience speaking, like evidence that the no was wrong. Here is what you need to understand about that guilt. It is not a moral signal. It is a conditioned response. In a healthy relationship with your own conscience, guilt arises when you have genuinely caused harm, when you have done something that contradicts your actual values, when the discomfort is pointing at a real transgression. That kind of guilt is useful. It is worth paying attention to. But the guilt that arrives when you simply decline to absorb someone else's discomfort is different. It is not pointing at harm you caused. It is pointing at a conditioned expectation that you would say yes. It is the old program responding to the deviation from its script. The program expected yes. You gave no. The program flags that as an error. The error generates the discomfort of guilt. But the program is wrong. It was written in a different environment, for different conditions, with a different understanding of what was required from you. The guilt is not your conscience speaking. It is your conditioning speaking. And conditioning, unlike conscience, is not a reliable guide. It is a habit. And habits, practiced differently enough times, change. Here is what actually happens when you start saying no, because the fear about this is almost always more intense than the reality. The fear says everything falls apart, people leave, relationships crack, the carefully maintained equilibrium collapses. Everything you built through the pattern gets destroyed by the change. Sometimes, honestly, something does shift. Some people push back. The person who had grown used to your unlimited yes will notice when it is not there. They may test it, apply pressure, express disappointment in ways that are designed to produce the familiar capitulation. This is not them being malicious. It is them responding to a change in a pattern they had adapted to. They learned that pushing produces yes, and they are running that pattern one more time to see if it still works. Your job in that moment is not to manage their response. Your job is to hold the no, calmly, clearly, without lengthy explanation, without apology that reverses the decision, without the softening that turns the no back into a yes. The no that holds, the no that does not fold under the first application of pressure, communicates something the apologetic capitulation never could. It communicates that the limit is real, that it is not a negotiating position, that the relationship exists on honest terms now, and most relationships, given time and given the consistent experience of the honest no, adjust. Not all of them. Some people were only comfortable with the performing, accommodating version of you, but those relationships were not giving you what real connection is supposed to give. They were giving you approval in exchange for compliance. And approval in exchange for compliance is not love. The relationships worth having are the ones that adjust, that find a way to exist with the real version of you rather than the managed version. And those relationships, restructured on honest terms, become more real, more nourishing, more genuinely mutual, more like what connection was supposed to feel like all along. Here is something worth understanding about the people who seem genuinely comfortable saying no. They were not born this way. The ease you observe is not a personality trait. It is not a temperament they were given. It is not that disappointing people simply does not affect them. They learned it through accumulated experience of saying no and surviving the aftermath. Here is how that learning works. The first no is the hardest, because the predicted catastrophe is at its most vivid. The nervous system is running its highest alert. The guilt arrives loudest. The pressure to reverse the decision is strongest. And you say it anyway. And what happens is less than predicted. The person is disappointed but does not leave. The relationship is temporarily awkward but does not break. The disapproval passes faster than the fear suggested it would. You are still standing on the other side of it, and the nervous system receives that information. It updates the prediction slightly. The next no is still hard, but slightly less. The prediction of catastrophe is slightly quieter. The guilt is slightly less overwhelming. And again, what happens is less than predicted. And again, the prediction updates. Each no that survives adds to a record of evidence that the no is survivable, that the relationship held, that the feared outcome did not materialize. And the person who has enough of that record built becomes the person who seems comfortable with no. Not because they stopped caring, because they stopped predicting catastrophe, because the evidence finally outweighed the old learning. That evidence is available to you. But it can only be built by saying the no. There is no way to gather it from the outside. It has to be lived. Here is what saying no actually sounds like, because most people who struggle with this imagine it as something enormous, a confrontation that requires careful setup, an announcement that demands extensive justification, a declaration that needs to be defended. It is not. It is usually one sentence. That does not work for me. I am not going to be able to do that. I need to say no to that. That is not something I can take on right now. No apology required before the sentence. No lengthy explanation attached after it. No story about why you cannot, designed to make the refusal seem legitimate enough to deserve acceptance. One clear sentence. And then quiet. The quiet is where most people fail, because the quiet feels like an emergency, like it needs to be filled, like the discomfort of the other person sitting with the no needs to be actively managed. It does not. Their discomfort with the no is their experience to have, not your problem to solve, not your responsibility to relieve, not your signal to relieve decision. You said the honest sentence. That was your part. Their response is their part, and the person who says the honest sentence and then allows the quiet, who does not rush to fill the space with apologies and alternatives and softeners, is communicating something important, that the no is complete, that it is not a starting position, that it does not require their approval to be valid. That is the no that holds. That is the no that changes the dynamic. That is the no that, said enough times, changes the relationship from something maintained through compliance to something built on honesty. Here is something specific about the people in your life, because not everyone in your life is asking the same thing of you. Some of the people in your life, when you say no, will simply say okay. They will adjust. They will find another solution. They will not make you the reason their day got harder. They will not apply pressure designed to reverse your decision. They will respect that you have limits and move forward accordingly. These are the people who have always been in your life. You may not have noticed them clearly because your energy has been going toward the people whose responses required management. But they are there, the ones who do not need your yes to stay, the ones whose warmth toward you does not fluctuate based on your level of compliance, the ones with whom you could be honest and nothing fundamental would break. These relationships are worth noticing, worth investing in, worth paying attention to as you build the new pattern, because they are the evidence that the fear is not universally warranted, that there are people in the world who do not require your management, who want the real version of you, who would be genuinely fine with an honest no. And some of the other people, the ones whose responses have required more management, are also worth looking at honestly. Not to blame, not to write off, but to understand clearly what the dynamic has been, what it has required of you, what it has given back. whether the exchange has been genuinely mutual, whether the relationship as it currently exists is built on something real. That honest look is not cruel. It is the clarity that the pattern has been preventing. The pattern keeps the relationships exactly as they are by preventing the honest engagement that would allow them to become more real or reveal that they were never what you thought. Either way, the clarity is better than the performance. Here is where we leave this. Not with a script for the next request, not with a framework to memorize, with the truth that makes the no possible from the inside out. The people who deserve your yes are the ones who would accept your no. That sentence is worth sitting with. The people who deserve your yes are the ones who would accept your no. Because a yes only means something when no was genuinely an option. A yes, produced by fear, by the inability to tolerate the consequences of the alternative, by the conditioned need to manage the other person's reaction, is not really a yes. It is compliance, and compliance is not connection. Compliance is not love. Compliance is not the kind of relationship worth sacrificing your own interior life to maintain. The relationships worth having are the ones where your honesty is genuinely welcome, where your limits are respected without requiring justification, where you can say this does not work for me and the other person says okay, and nothing fundamental breaks. Where the yes you give means something because the no was always an option. Those relationships exist. You may already have some of them, and you will find more of them as you become more honest. Because honesty is a filter. It shows you over time who was there for the real version of you and who was there for the managed version. Who stays when you stop performing, who adjusts when the dynamic shifts to something real, who was interested in you and who was interested in your compliance. The real version of you deserves to know the difference. You are allowed to know the difference. And the way you find out is by being the real version, by saying what is true, by holding the limits that are genuine, by giving the yes that is real and the no that is honest, by stopping the performance and allowing whoever stays to be the people who actually know you. Not the performing you, not the accommodating you, not the yes machine that has been running on fear for so many years. You, the version that knows what it wants, that feels what it feels, that has limits that are real and a voice that is honest. That version has been in there the whole time, underneath everything the pattern built on top of it. You do not have to earn your place in the room. You do not have to prove that your existence is justified through your usefulness. You do not have to make yourself easy to be around before you are allowed to be there. You are allowed to be there, exactly as you are, with the no that is honest, the yes that is real, the limits that belong to you. Start there. In the next moment the pattern tries to run, with the discomfort still present, with the guilt still arriving, with the old program still generating its prediction. Say the honest thing anyway, and notice what happens, because what happens is almost always less than the fear predicted, and less than the fear predicted is how the prediction changes, and the prediction changing is how the pattern changes. And the pattern changing is how you get back the life that was always yours. One honest sentence at a time.